let me cordially welcome all of you, ladies and gentlemen, to the 29th presentation of Evening for Managers, organized by Chartered Professional Managers of Sri Lanka, which is organized by the Education, Research and Development Committee. Today, we are going to focus on a very important topic given the context of the nation, a positive approach to investment and savings during an economic downturn. Let me add a slight preamble to this topic. CPM is desirous of creating member and public awareness on savings and investments as a means of covering the current financial crisis faced by the country. The seminar hopes to build and expand knowledge on financial products and instruments, as well as investment selection techniques and saving strategies available to individuals and their companies to improve their financial lives and build wealth. That being said, to formally welcome all of you, let me cordially invite the founder and president of Chartered Professional Managers of Sri Lanka, Professor Lashwanar Vatavala.
Thank you, Dr. Dilhan. Let me welcome all our speakers who are lined up here. We have Dr. Tissa Jayavira, Ms. Dilini Jayasuriya, and Mr. Roshan Ranasinghe. And our moderator is Mr. Sumendra Jayaram. As mentioned, it's a very important topic, a positive approach to investment and savings during an economic downturn. I think that term should have been different. It should be, of course, economic crisis, because even I think what was stated yesterday in Parliament with the budget that was presented, it was mentioned about the economic crisis and how we can solve it. But I'm sure the approach of investment and savings is an area which could have saved our country. But now I think we need to see how we can look at that area more positively. Just to say a few words about CPM, or the Institute of Certified Chartered Professional Managers. Our main aim, of course, is to improve the management. So today you can see what is really happening. Most of the things that are happened is due to maybe either mismanagement or bad management, or maybe no management. So our chartered professional managers have to play a major role. And this evening for managers, which we have organized, I must thank our chairman of the Education Committee, Dr. Samantha Ratnayaka, who's been playing a major role in this, and also our director, Mr. Dilshan Arskul Ratna, who has been coordinating all the activities to do this. So management is very important. So that we have started a few programs on entrepreneurship and management, also, so that it will help the managers to maybe get a better insight as to how they should manage the affairs of their company. Then, of course, ultimately, it will be the economy and the government areas of activity. So the membership is also open to those who are in the management profession, because if you can be in any profession, but if you do not have management, then that is really not going to work. You may have the best qualified doctors, you may have the best qualified engineers, accountants, everyone, but if they are unable to manage the matters, then of course ultimately will be in great problem. And today the country is in a very, very bad situation. But I think we all, as managers, professional managers, we have to get together in order to build the country. So that, I think, is a special message that I want to give you, that as professional managers, each one should play their role, and definitely you can put things together. You have to guide your people, you have to guide your activities, and maybe we need to also make a lot of sacrifices. So that has to be done in a time of in a crisis time. So I'm sure that our CPM which is the professional managers body in Sri Lanka, will be able to play this role, and all members would be able, not only the professional management, the conduct of their affairs, the integrity, the honesty, efficiency, productivity are all connected. So I'm sure that the management profession can play a major role. So let me, while welcoming all our distinguished speakers and our moderator, I must also thank all our participants for their presence, and that they will definitely gain quite a lot from this seminar. So thank you very much, and I wish you all the very best.
Thank you very much, Professor, for welcoming everyone. And prior to proceeding with the presentation, let me take the opportunity to remind of our sponsor. Our corporate sponsor for CPM is MasterCard. So MasterCard is quite supportive in this endeavor, as well as the corporate sponsor for CPM in this year. And also, I have a small message for the audience to forward their questions via the chat, which will be discussed at the panel discussion, since, as you know, after the presentation, we are going for a panel discussion. So your questions will be answered in that, if you are able to drop it in the chat box. So without further ado, let me introduce the first presenter. That is none other than Mr. Roshan Ranasinghe, the founder of Tribe Funds and founder of Gradient Alliance. So just a small introduction. Mr. Roshan Ranasinghe is the founder of Gradient Alliance, a corporate finance services provider. He possesses over 15 years of experience in equity and fixed income research. He is also the founder of Tribe Funds, a crowdfunding platform raising funds for individuals, groups, and businesses. He's a graduate in finance from the University of Aston, UK, and has completed CIMA and CFA programs. Mr. Roshan Ranasinghe, over to you.
Thank you, Dylan. Good evening, everybody. I hope you guys can hear me clearly.
Can hear you.
Fantastic. Thank you for the reach out and invitation. I think the topic chosen is very important, as Professor Lakshman mentioned. The downturn in the life cycle of an economic activity is one stage. Some say that we are already in the downturn, but we can also feel that there are signs there may be stability and then a turnaround, and eventually we will move towards positive outlook. So that is the key stages. In every position or in every stage of the life cycle, there may be opportunities, and also there may be pitfalls. It might be the rosiest of economic performance of a country, but there can be disadvantages to that as well, and there can be pitfalls in a downturn, but there are also opportunities. So I have a short presentation which I will share with you. Just give me a few seconds to load it up. Right, you guys can see my screen?
Yeah, I can see the screen.
Right. So from my presentation, I have 4 intended takeaways. Self-assessment, analysis of the current environment, determining a diversified portfolio, and then the adjustment. So moving on to the first area, which is a critical aspect of looking into an investment or a saving, is the internal review of ourselves. So within this, we should ask ourselves, why do we want a return? Understanding our wants and needs. Sometimes our wants triumph our needs. So needs is the essence of that has to be focused first, but sometimes we focus too much on the wants. So these are some of the reasons why we want a return from an investment or a savings, boosting cash income, retirement planning, or supplementary income when our basic income is sufficient. The second question to ask ourselves is, what type of return do I want? Because there are many types, or rather there are predominantly 3 types of return: passive, active, and capital gains. Passive is this, I'm sure you guys already know, but I'll just mention it. Passive is what you park your money and you get your interest. Active is what you get from dividends and what you get from an active allocation of funds, unit trust, your real estate rental returns, and so on. Then you get your capital gains from your asset base. Another question to ask in the important self-assessment stage is, what is your risk appetite? I just want to emphasize these 3 aspects are independent of the asset that you're willing to invest in. So the risk appetite can be based on your personal characteristics and your status, age, family status, and so on. So once these questions are answered in a sort of a mind map, you have a better understanding of how much you're willing to invest, what type of assets you want to get into, what is your time horizon, all those things, and what is your need or want. Those are the key outcomes here. So once that stage is over, second important area to look at is analyzing the external environment. So the question that would come to mind is, why do you want to analyze the external environment? Mainly 2 things. One is our own presence, our own standing our own standing will change based on what's happening in the external environment. The current situation in the country is evidence of that. You may lose a job, we may have a salary cut, interest rates will go up, all those kind of things will happen. So assessing the key economic indicators of the economic setup is extremely important. Looking at fiscal and monetary policies, the debt levels, all those things, is not really an in-depth economic analysis. It's just having a brief understanding of what these indicators are telling us. Is it a positive? Is it a negative? Is it a stable? So the next aspect is, how stable is the government? Moving on, what is the status of the banking sector? Here, particularly, the banking sector is essentially a key pillar in the foundation of a country. I'm sure there are many bankers on the call today. They will have a better understanding of this, how important the banking sector is to the operations or the performance of a country. What is the status of consumption and some of the key industries that the country is in. So for example, if you look at in Sri Lanka, apparel, tourism, foreign worker remittances are some of the key industries for us to have, for us to be knowledgeable of. We need these details, we need this information from these 4 areas to gauge some of the influences of a particular asset's performance that we choose to be in. So that's why we conduct this external environment. And as I said a few moments earlier, the performance of the external environment will affect our self-assessment as well. So moving on. So once we have the first 2 sectors identified, we look at the asset portfolio. So asset portfolios can be in 3 broad categories: passive, active, and capital gains. So passive return, as I mentioned, can be FDs, savings, treasury bills and bonds, corporate bond debentures, insurance, and so on. Active returns, dividends,, rental income, and capital gains, stocks and real estate. the performance during a downturn for these specific asset classes vary. You can see from the right-hand side of the table, in a downturn, stocks and real estate do well. Why do they do well? Because real estate in a country like Sri Lanka is considered a store of value, giving good returns. Of course, I mean, we have only 65,000 square kilometers, so the scarcity of supply is also a key factor as well. Stocks, not all stocks are a good investment during a downturn. In fact, some of them, actually reallocate the stock portfolio into safe assets, which are like FDs, T-bills, savings, and so on. But a key disadvantage of reallocating or rather investing FD savings in a downturn is because of the high inflationary pressure that happens in a downturn. Your real returns are negatively affected. So thereby, it's good high quality stocks with good cash positions with high dividends are considered a good investment from that standpoint, depending on your risk appetite. Then you have your corporate bonds, debentures. So all these, by their very nature of being a passive return, they offer a flat monetary return. So in an inflation environment, as I mentioned, they erode the real value. As you have seen today, for August, the Colombo inflation was 63.4. I think the best FD rates at the moment are something like 17 or even less than that, I believe, something like 15-16% for a senior citizen. And for regular, if you go to a bank, it's about 11-12%. So there itself, you're making about 50% negative real return. Even treasury bills and bonds in today's bond auction market was at 29%, still below inflation rates. Of course, inflation is transitory, but then again, if you look at Sri Lanka, I think for the past 6 to 7 months, we have had inflation at over 30%. So these are kind of conversations we must have when deciding to get into an asset class. Diversification is key. In this sense, diversification works in two aspects. One is if you have a pot of money, to allocate certain percentages of that portfolio into a passive return, active return, and capital gain. I mean, it's not going to be a one-third. I'm sure most of you have studied for your banking exams and other professional examination. The textbook theory is based on the age, your family, your status. If you're young, 25 to 40, you allocate more to active return capital gain portfolio and less to your passive return. And as you get older, you invest more in the risk-free rate, the passive return. So those textbooks theory apply in the real world as well. But then again, it depends on your personal circumstances. So once a diversified portfolio is invested in, it's important to look, or rather, sorry, if you're taking a step back, before investing in a portfolio, it's important to look at some of these specific characteristics of the assets that you're getting into, particularly relating to real estate stocks, or even if you're investing in FD savings, the quality of the financial institution, in this case, a bank or a leasing company, because they are risk rating based on either ICRA or Fitch can range from AAAs to -Bs. So those kind of individual research is an area that has to be done, prior to investing in an asset class. I know, I mean, most of us kind of don't read the research reports that these guys put out, or kind of look at it from a framework of a risk of the entity. I mean, I think in the past, a lot of banks went under because people did not perform good due diligence on the entity itself, and because they were offering high returns and maybe a a high-profile celebrity was endorsing the institute, they invested. So these are kind of some of the cardinal mistakes that we all tend to make. So conducting research on the asset is very important. Then moving on to the last point is absolutely crucial. Once the above 3 steps have been done, we have to monitor the asset portfolio and the individual assets. Why do we do that? Because the riskiness of a chosen asset changes. The economic performance of a country changes. The industries changes. So the riskiness of an asset can change due to our personal circumstances. We may, as we have experience or we know somebody, I mean, you can lose your job, you can take a pay cut. Likewise, on the flip side, you may get a promotion, move on to a new job, you may start a new business. So because of the changing personal circumstances, the asset portfolio should be relooked at to minimize your overall risk. Secondly, the riskiness of the macroeconomic environment may change. For example, I mean, just taking yesterday to today, I think most of you would have heard the news that Sri Lanka and IMF is very likely to sign a staff level agreement, and the stock market shot up today on that news. And there is a press conference at 11 a.m. tomorrow morning at the IMF office regarding what we feel is a potential staff level agreement announcement. So that's a huge boost to the country. So that is a key tool that will make our current downturn position move into a more stabilizing position. So that's why we have to monitor what's happening in the macroeconomic environment. And thirdly, the specific asset classes characteristic would change as well. Particularly with real estate, there might be a problem with the location or some government regulation. With a particular stock, if you are invested in the fundamental dynamics of the stock may change, there may be change in management, the industry. Logistics is a good example. During COVID, logistics stocks had a significant boost, and even the software that we use, the application that we're using now, Zoom, had a significant boost. But if you see now, the stock price of Zoom has plummeted because COVID restrictions are relaxed and people are getting back to work. So these are some of the fundamental things that we have, not fundamental, these are some of the key aspects that we have to keep looking at. And with asset classes, even if it's a simple FD or savings, what's happening in the banking industry, what's happening with the rates, banks, I'm sure you guys know if we are forced to consider domestic debt in a debt restructuring process that IMF plans out for us, then treasury bills and treasury bonds will have to take a haircut. So totally outside of our control. So these are the things we have to monitor. So those are the key points. So in summary, as I mentioned at the beginning, the key takeaways from my presentation for you are self-assessment of yourself. I hope some of the points that I mentioned brought out the importance of that. And secondly, analyzing the current environment and the future. Thirdly is determining a diversified portfolio. And lastly, the crucial thing of monitoring your asset portfolio, the individual assets, as well as the economic environment, and keep adjusting, keep revising, or if the information that you have, you feel you're confident with it, and it's a temporary bump on the road, to maintain your portfolio. So these are the conversations you must have with yourself, with the people that you have the people with your groups, depending on what asset class you're in. That will help you to align your investment decisions and also have a direct implication on the returns that you get. With that, I will conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roshan, for that presentation, and it was very insightful. And moving on, we have more presentations coming up on this all-important topic that we are discussing today. Our next presenter on the forum is Ms. Dilini Jasuri. She is the founder and executive director of Breakthrough Business Intelligence Private Limited. I will also take you through her illustrious profile. Dilini Jasuri has been involved in the market research industry for over 23 years. Post her tenure as a CEO of a leading multinational research agency, she founded Breakthrough Business Intelligence, a boutique marketing research agency, 13 years ago. She currently serves as a board member at the MRSSL, the Market Research Society of Sri Lanka. Breakthrough is a market research agency committed to providing insightful partnerships that drive bottom-line results for clients. Today, it has expanded its operations beyond local shores to Bangladesh and Maldives. She has completed her postgraduate studies in the field of business management, marketing, and psychology. She is an alumna of the Postgraduate Institute of Management. Dilini considers herself to be a student of human nature and takes immense pleasure in understanding the human psyche. She lives in suburban Colombo with her husband and their daughter, and interestingly, 10 dogs. Ms. Dilini Jayasuriya, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dilhan Jayatirak, for that wonderful introduction. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Professor Lakshmanar Vattavala and the Institute of Chartered Professional Managers for extending this invitation to me. I was listening to Roshan and I thought it was a very insightful session, Roshan, so thank you for that as well. I would like to talk about the topic today, more taking a step back before we come into investments and savings. You know, it's important for us to really understand the flip side of investment and savings, which is debt, which we call the nemesis of investments and savings. So let me just take you through my presentation. In terms of today's discussion, I would like to talk primarily about 4 areas. First and foremost, I'd like to talk about the Sri Lankan lifestyle. This whole aspect of debt culture versus save culture. It's also important for us to look at avoiding the debt trap, which will ultimately help us save and invest. And how do we overcome the debt trap? You know, there are certain baby steps that we could follow. And adding on and expanding a little bit in terms of what Roshan said in terms of the investment portfolio, a few guidelines. So if you really look at, as a researcher, what we do day out and day in is collect data about the local consumers, their preferences, a lot about the local market. So from that perspective, if you really look at some of the basic statistics, in 2019, the average household expenditure was estimated in the annual income and expenditure survey, was arrived at, in fact, to be 65,000 rupees. In 2022, for the same household, if you look at the estimated cost, it has gone up to 110,000 rupees. Is the estimated cost. So if you look at it with inflation, we see that, you know, there's a heavy, burden on our lifestyle that we are taking on in terms of purchase and consumption. If you look at from a market research perspective, we look at classifying the consumers, 21 million people, into 5 broad classes, which we call the socio-economic classification or the SCC classification. I'm sure most of you would have heard of this, but let me just take a moment to explain how do we arrive at it. We look at the SCC based on the chief wage earner, the person who contributes most to the household expenditure, that person's education, the designation, and we also look at the ownership of white goods at a household level. So if you look at it, we broadly look at SECA, which is the top tier of the market, looking at, consists of 7.5% of our population. SECB consists of 22.8%, C consists of 27.5%, D 24.6%, and E 16.6%. So if you look at it from a lot of the professionals like you who seated in SECA, we go down to SECE, who is the illiterate segment, daily wage earners who are working in Sri Lanka. Now, at Breakthrough, what we have also tried to do is look at it more from an income perspective, because our current SEC classification does not look at income, simply because income can be overstated or understated depending on who's asking that. You know, if you come and ask me my income, I might overstate it. To impress you, I might understate it just to avoid certain taxation matters. So if you look at the top bracket of this market, we have 2% of the super rich that we are associating. Of course, if you look at Colombo by and large, we think a lot of the people are super rich. But if you look at it from a statistical perspective, we have roughly about 2% who are earning roughly about 300,000 at a household level, followed by 7% who's the affluent. 13% and 36% is the second bracket, who we call, the getting bys and the survivors. They are roughly earning ranging from 75 to 100. That's the getting by segment. Survivors are really looking at earning about 55,000 because their range goes from 4 to about 75,000. Then we come to the bottom percentages. We have 24% of the market who we call and coin as strugglers, earning about 25 to about 40,000, 18% who are deprived, really income below 25,000. Now, you can really clearly see where you are. I believe most of you would be in that top 2% of the economy. Now, just to talk a little bit very quickly about the super rich and to link it back into our topic today, if you look at it, the super rich really, looks at funding their lifestyle, their cost on food, which is really rising, is relatively a low percentage. And what we really see is they're really spending a lot of money on big ticket items. With work from home coming in, we saw a lot of investments that were done in their homes during COVID and which is still continuing. If you look at the affluent and the getting by segment, we see credit start coming in here because although they are investing in big ticket items, it's mainly through credit. We also see that, the whole fuel situation, the fact that they can't go out, travel is really impacting their lifestyle and their levels of frustration. Looking at the survivors, what we see is, store credit. Especially what we mean by store credit is you buy goods and at the end of the month, you go into the shop, the nearby grocery and start settling this money. So we see the Nayapoto or store credit starts coming in here because they are roughly earning about 4 to 75,000. And what we see is from a food expenditure perspective, roughly about 50% of what they earn goes into food expenditure. Coming to the bottom two segments, strugglers and the deprived segment, what we really see, they really do fall into the debt trap. Generally, what we see is that if you look at it, a lot of unreasonable credit scheme and loan scheme starts creeping into these segments. There's a lot of loan sharks, spawning that's happening. And from a lifestyle perspective, we see a lot of them are into alcohol abuse, substance abuse, which is also taking them further into the debt trap. And also from a cost perspective, their food consumption being very basic, they tend to cut it down, and we see a lot of malnutrition and access to education amongst these families drastically reducing. So if you look at it, this just in terms of the Sri Lankan consumer and their lifestyle. So how are we really funding our lifestyle? Now, if you look at it, this is very much like how Sri Lanka has been run, over the last couple of years. I would say a couple of years, meaning not 5-6 years, 70 odd years or even longer. So I can clearly see a correlation between how the country is run and how our lifestyles have been funded. So if you really look at it, even at a personal level, if you look at the 5 segments, we see that there's unsustainable debt, and that debt has been taken over time to sustain our lifestyle. And that's a fundamental financial mistake that most Sri Lankans are making. Because if you look at it, our culture is all about spend versus save. So if you really look at it, the type of debt that the different classes are going into, again, we have superimposed the kind of debt that they follow. What we see is at the top tier, we see things like credit cards, housing loans, personal loans, leasing, hire purchase that comes in, which is essentially to do with maintaining one's social image. So you take a lot of debt to maintain your social image. At the bottom level, the surviving segment, really looks at taking pawning, shop credit, loan sharks to really survive. So on one side, if you look at the broad spectrum, on one side you have the social or maintenance of self, the outer image, versus really the bare essential survival that's coming in. So if you really look at it, some of the verbatim that when we speak to consumers, what they're saying is, we own a car which is more expensive than our house. Just for a moment, imagine. This applies to a lot of us. We funded our wedding through a loan, may not necessarily apply to you all, but if you really look at it, pleasing the ego is something that we are all doing. And at the bottom, I have also brought in certain quick non-regulated financial methods that are there, like cash wagon and fast rupee, which is also really looking at funding the lifestyles of millennials. If you want to buy a quick 35,000 or a 55,000 phone, you are able to really get a 15,000 quick credit limit or a quick loan without any collateral. So what we really see is this ego pleasing is something that has really helped. That has really trapped us in this debt, which is going back to really looking at funding a lifestyle. So if you look at it, it's important as a nation, as individuals, for us to avoid the accumulation of debt and falling into the debt trap before you start saving and investing. And this is how I come into today's topic, because savings and investment is a step further. It's important if you take a step back to really look at avoiding this debt trap. So how do we really avoid the debt trap? It's all about being mindful and watching out, because if you look at it today, financial institutions, the moment you open an FD, the moment you go there and make an inquiry, there are so many offers that are there, loan offers, credit card offers, you're just bombarded with so many calls asking, can I offer this to you? A lot of easy payment schemes. We work with a retailer who's saying, people are just coming and buying white goods because they can pay later, or they assume they can pay later. So if you look at it, credit-worthy customers are really getting bombarded with a lot of offers out there. So it's really important for you to scrutinize and check before you sign up for more credit and greater debt. So, it's really important for you to understand, do I really want it? Is this the time to be taking it? And what am I really going to be using it for? Because we see a real strong correlation between debt and saving and investment. So if you look at it, let me just explain it. So if you look at a typical household, you have your essential expenditure, which is into discretionary expenses, things that you can really do without, your eating out, your movies, etc. And your debt payment commitment, which is highlighted in pink. So if you look at it, now on my left-hand side, what we see is a typical household which is surviving based on a lot of debt payments. Now, if you look at the diagram which is on my right-hand side, the lower your debt payment commitment starts becoming, there's a greater chance of building assets and really saving. So the correlation that I spoke about earlier is greater the debt, you're going to have a low focus in terms of investments and savings. And the opposite happens in terms of the, vice versa aspect of it. So if you really look at it, it's very important for you to look at changing your mindset before getting into debt or further debt if you've already accumulated a certain amount of debt. It's all to do with changing your mindset, because it's very important for us to look at becoming savings and investment conscious. It's also important for us at an individual level to look at our assets versus liabilities, clearly calculating this. I will talk about this as we go on in the next slide. Learning to refuse, it's a very important role in terms of debt management. Learning to refuse is what I spoke about earlier. You've got lots of offers. So it's important for you to figure out when to say no and whom to say no to. Educating yourself is very important when you are going into debt. It's important for you to check for conditions and clauses. I heard Roshan talking about a lot of managers and bankers. It's important for you to really figure out, even when you're giving something out to the customer, fine print may work, but that's also kind of pushing certain segments into debt traps. It's important to be transparent as service providers. Evaluating whether you really need this extra debt and if so, for what, and learning to let go. I talk about this interesting campaign of Got Milk, which was really developed back in the day. So what US really experienced was the fact that there was a huge drop in their milk consumption, and if you look at it, if you look at it, today with the cost of milk powder, a lot of people are getting into debt to give milk to their kids. If you look at it really, milk is all about, the nutrition of a calf. Humans may not necessarily need that. So, if you look at marketing, especially with social media coming into place today, we are creating a lot of needs that may not necessarily be what you want, So what we are trying to do is create artificial needs, make you really enticed with certain offers, simply because of marketing and advertising. I'm a marketer by heart, that's where my training is. But what I'm still saying is that as a consumer, you've got to really become conscious of the communication that's out there and not really be too enticed by offers that are there. Because interestingly, some of the research work that we have done on credit card show that majority of the users of credit card use it for supermarkets, followed by fashion retail, in terms of, again, funding, lifestyle, and some other luxury items that you're looking at purchasing. So one of the interesting books that I have read when I was studying for my postgraduates was this book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It was written back in 1997 by Robert Kiyosaki. He really looks at this concept of assets versus liabilities. I'm sure most of you might be aware of it. In case you are not, let me just quickly recap. It's available on audiobooks if you want to go through this in 4 minutes. So if you look at an asset, it's all about bringing money into my pocket. Your assets will work for you, whereas your liabilities will take money out of the pocket. I've just given a quick illustration here. So if you buy a luxury car and if you're really maintaining it, it becomes a liability, especially if you're buying it on a loan or a lease. If you're looking at your assets, if you give the same car on rent and if that car starts working for you, it becomes an asset. So it's very important for you to, as an individual or as a group of individuals, for you to look at listing your income, the real income, your expenses, is your food, your housing, whatever the direct expenses that you have, looking at your asset and your liabilities. Now, what we see is in an ideal situation, the top 2% of the market that I spoke about starts really earning the passive income. Passive income is getting your assets to work for you. So if you're very healthy, if you've got a large passive income that's really working for you even in your sleep, but if you've got no passive income, you're really having to look at your portfolio and take a soul searching journey in terms of how can you really expand your income. Because the golden formula is if your assets don't work for you, and if you've got great liability, you're going to really be in that debt trap. A good question that I keep asking people is, how many months can you survive without a steady income? If you lose your job tomorrow, which is quite possible in this economic crisis, as Professor Watterwala was talking about, it is a crisis. So if you lose your job tomorrow, how many months can you really survive without going into great debt? So if you look at it, I spoke about this very briefly. The top 2% has higher assets and the rest of the market tends to have higher liabilities. So it's important to really get your assets to work for you and to convert some of these liabilities into assets. So if you look at it, some of the baby steps that we can follow, I go back to a financial guru called Dave Ramsey. He's in the US, to have an individual session with Dave Ramsey in terms of, your financial advice or getting your portfolio re-looked at. A session of about an hour costs about $7,000. So he speaks about interesting 7 baby steps. The first step really looks at, if you want to overcome debt and if you are looking at wealth accumulation, these adapted to the Sri Lankan context from him. The first baby step is, you've got to really look at creating an emergency fund, and it needs to go in these steps. So if you look at this emergency fund, I've estimated it to be $500,000 rupees or 1.5 months salary for unforeseen emergencies. You need to first and foremost put that aside, because if you don't have this, you can really fall into this debt trap. The second aspect is if you've got multiple debts, this could be from housing to credit cards to leases, you really look at a method called snowball debt setting off. This is something that we use even in market research. We look at the snowball method. So here what is advised is to list all your debts except for your housing loan, which is a long-term loan. And you look at putting them in order of the balance in terms of smallest to largest. You put the minimum across everyone on each of those items, and you look at tackling the smallest very aggressively and then just moving on. So you snowball from one to another. You're also looking at once when you have, paid off your debt in this order. It might take, depending on where you are in your life, it might take you 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, or about 3 years. Up to the individual, depending on how young you are, how much money you earn. Once when you have paid off all your debt, it's important for you to start looking at saving 3 to 6 months of expenses for an emergency fund, right? So you create an emergency fund, you pay off your debt, then you start fully funding your emergency fund. So here, this could be any unforeseen emergencies. You start putting in money, again, looking at a 3 to 6 month expense window. Moving on to baby step number 4. This is something most Sri Lankans may not be looking at. Even if you look at the insurance penetration in Sri Lanka, it's pretty low. So you need to look at your retirement. Again, 15% is just a rough average. As said earlier, it depends on how young you are, your stage of life, your health, whether you're having a fullness or an emptiness. So you need to look at those aspects and look at putting aside a retirement fund. After that, if you've got kids, if you're married, you've got to look at also your kids' education. Right now, it could be private education in Sri Lanka or public education. Either way, you need to be looking at funding your kids' education. Here, what is recommended by Dave Ramsey is to pay off your home loan early. But in Sri Lanka, if you've gone into like a 20-year period or a 15-year period on a fixed percentage, it's important for you to at this point start building your asset base. Start looking at your investment, looking at diversifying your portfolio. So really start once when you have paid off your debt, once when you have started creating a fund for your kids, then you start looking at really, going into a lot of investments. And then finally, it's all about giving back. It's important for us to do that as human beings and as a society. It's not to say that only, at the age of 55 or 60, when you have gone through the 7 steps, you start really looking at giving back. No, you start giving whenever you can, but the real giving back to your family, your generosity in terms of leaving your legacy behind starts as the final step. So in terms of, investment, just to leave a few parting notes with you. So one rule of thumb is, to avoid all your eggs in one basket. Prashant spoke about the investments, at a very great length. So, fixed deposits, yes, there is a big hype at the moment. If you speak to the average consumer, the discussions are, this bank gave me X percentage, the other bank gave me Y percentage, so which one should I go into? Because when you speak to consumers, there's a big hype that we see about FDs in the market. It's important for you to diversify. FDs is good, but you also need to look at other forms of investments that are listed out here, and this can really be an exhaustive list. Yes, the 1/3 rule, for those of you who studied finance further, is just a rule of thumb. This is just a demarcation only. Look at it. It depends on where you are in your life, your health, your assets, all that. But try and go into high risk, high return, low risk, low return, moderate risk, moderate return kind of portfolio. Have a balanced portfolio, because it's important for you to really look at diversifying into various forms of assets in terms of when you are looking at your investment. So I've almost come to the end of my presentation. I've been allocated 20 minutes. So let me just recap what were the key takeaways from today's discussion. It's important for us, as individuals, as a society, and as a country, to really look at financing our lifestyles through debt. That's the main thing that we need to avoid as Sri Lankans. If you even look at a wedding, we are feeding 300 people, starting a new journey in life on debt and paying that debt off over a 3-year period. I mean, yes, there are better ways of doing this in a more sustainable manner. As I said earlier, the greater debt you have, your focus on savings and investment is going to be low. It's important for you to increase your ownership on assets that generate money. Also, you need to be mindful of debt accumulation, because today you take one debt and it can really go over where you have got an unsustainable debt, very much like where we are as a country, which you can't pay off. You need to avoid the debt trap. There are 2 baby steps that I spoke about, so read up more on Dave Ramsey. It's important for you to make note of investment and risk diversification. And very importantly, as a nation, we don't really educate ourselves on financial management. It needs to start early as a family, as a community, as a bunch of friends. We need to start talking about this. You know, we are very secretive about our finances. This is where I spoke about income can be overstated or understated. It's important that we open up and talk about financial management. Good old days, the belief was, don't talk about money over dinner. It's important for you to speak about money over dinner and really see how best can you handle it as a family, handle it as a bunch of people, even in an office, to really share that accumulated knowledge and get into better financial management. With that, I'm going to come into the end of my presentation. If there are any questions, let me take it up at the end of the third session during the Q&A session. Thank you very much. All the very best.
Thank you very much to Ms. Dilni Jayasuri as well for those wonderful insights shared. And of course, there will be questions that can be answered during the panel discussion. And we have the third and final presenter. I'm just going to introduce you to the presenter, and prior to doing so, let me also remind you once again to our participants to post your questions in the Q&A chat box so our panelists can answer during the discussion. And also, let me remind you of our corporate sponsor, MasterCard, and they are assisting us in this endeavor, the 29th Evening for Managers organized by CPM Sri Lanka. So our third and final presenter is Dr. Tissa Jayavira. Let me take you through his lengthy and illustrious profile. Tissa, as popularly known, educated at Royal College Colombo, represented college in athletics, swimming and gymnastics. National Diploma in Technology NDT, Bachelor's of Science, Masters of Science and Doctorate in Business. After an engineering career of 6 years in 2 reputed companies of Colombo, Tissa joined Ceylon Ceramics Corporation, trained by Noritake, Japan in ceramic technology and manufacture. Was seconded to establish Lanka Porcelain Limited, the Noritake and Ceylon Ceramics Corporation JV in Sri Lanka. In 1983, Tissa proceeded to USA for higher education, joined Pepsi-Cola and trained in customer care and hospitality. Later joined General Motors and was trained in sales and marketing and achieved the Best Salesperson Award of General Motors for Southern California on 2 occasions. In 1987, Tissa joined Interkiln Corporation of America to transfer ceramic manufacture technology to factories operated by Interkiln in People's Republic of China. In 1989, on the invitation of the government of Sri Lanka, Tissa returned and was nominated by Ministry of Industry as a director to Ceylon Ceramics Corporation (CCC). Fellow directors appointed him as managing director and elected him as chairman of the board of directors. Ministry of Industry, approved by Ministry of Finance, nominated Tissa as a director of the following organizations. Noritake nominated Tissa as chairman and managing director. Noritake Lanka Porcelain Private Limited. Fellow directors appointed him as chairman and managing director, Lanka Voltas Limited, then Lanka Tiles Limited and Lanka Refractories Limited. Tissa became the first to be chairman and MD of the entire ceramic group. Ceramic industry was nominated a thrust industry and became world famous. Lanka Ceramic was recognized as one of the 10 best managed companies in 1994 and 1995 dinner. Tissa held positions as chairman and MD of Ceylon Ceramics Corporation, Lanka Ceramic Limited, Noritake Lanka Porcelain Private Limited, Lanka Voltas Limited, Lanka Voltas Nipe Private Limited, Lanka Tiles Limited, Ceradec Private Limited, Lanka Refractories Limited, Itmin Limited, Director and alternate Chairman of Jai Lanka Private Limited, Chairman Jai Hilton Colombo, Advisor Japan Asia Investment Company Limited, President American Chamber of Commerce, Royal Commonwealth Society of Sri Lanka, President Federation of Chambers of Commerce and Industry in Sri Lanka, Vice President to SAARC Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Member Business Advisory Group UNESCAP, Advisor and Director to Lanyard Holdings PLC USA, Director Banaras House Group India, IGMR Dubai, Chairman International Chamber of Commerce, Sri Lanka, Accreditations Board Member, Labour Advisory Council of Ministry of Labour. Then Tissa was alternate chairman and MD to Jai Hilton, completed the first fully serviced 34-floor apartment complex in 18 months and maintained very cordial relations with Hilton International. In 1998, Tissa relinquished all positions in Sri Lanka and migrated to USA. Was appointed Vice President Asia by Interkiln Corporation of America to negotiate deals in Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. In 2004, Tissa returned and now holds positions as Chairman MD, Trade IT Global Private Limited, Global Oceana Private Limited, Chairman Premier Ceylon Hotels and Hospitality Private Limited, Premier Ceylon Teas and Spice Private Limited, Honeymoon Republic Private Limited, Chelsea Animals Private Limited, Director, Brain Wonders Lanka Private Limited, Director Lanka Startex Mystery Shopping Private Limited, Managing Partner to TG Associates, Vision 8 Academy, Claremont Resort, Member Executive Council, SARC Chamber of Commerce and Industry, EXCO Member, International Chamber of Commerce Sri Lanka, Royal Commonwealth Society, Federation of Chambers of Commerce and Industry of Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka Japan Business Corporation Council Member, Labour Advisory Council, Ministry of Labour, Member Advisory Council, UNESCAP Sustainable Business Network, and founder and senior advisor, FinTech Association Sri Lanka, and in his private capacity, an advisor to many industry and business groups. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Dr. Tissa Javira for his presentation and address.
Ayuboho, everybody. Good evening, and then let's start with two interesting presentations. But the topic I'm expected to cover is savings during a crisis period. Now, after listening to Roshan and Dilini, they gave us highly theoretical presentations of the current trend world as well as more harping on Sri Lanka. Now, if I take my experiences in working in 5 countries and being in 26 countries doing small projects or short-term projects, it's very, very interesting to note that all over the world, the savings or what people believe in is saving to own land and property. So that is the trend all over the world, taking the richest economies of Europe, USA, and taking the poorest of economies where most are in Asia and then in Africa. But they all like to own a house, whether it is luxurious or deprived or at the low end, but they do own. And how do they own? By utilizing services, utilizing the savings, and utilizing the aspects of loans that are available. So made the majority of the people in the world want to own a house. That's number one. Now, even in this country, getting back on to good old Sri Lanka, even in this country, people want to own a house. Some people want to own multitude of houses. Some people own the whole apartment complex, but then they get an income by renting the premises and various other aspects of that, running hotels and things like that. But getting back onto the topic of saving, people are interested in saving for themselves as well as for their kith and kin, or whatever we call them, their brood, the family, the children. Now that aspect is very, very strong in the Asian countries, not so much in the Western world, because the Western world, the parents live their own life and the children live their own life and left to them to make their money and then make their own lifestyle and households. Now, if we take our country, I'm taking Sri Lanka as an example because we are talking about the current economic crisis as well as the economic downturn of the country. Now, you will be surprised to note that we have only 7.5 million families in this country. Maybe some of you know about it, some of you don't know about it, but of that, around 180 to 200,000 people or families are super rich. That presentation was done by our pretty lady also, and Roshan touched on part of it on the savings and investment side, but that's where we stand. Then about 1.3 million families of this country are extremely poor. They don't have a fixed job. They don't have a fixed income. neither do they have a fixed place of stay. They are all floaters. It's shocking to note that 1.3 million families of this country, and then around the equal amount is on Samurthi, but Lakshman and I, during the time that Samurthi was started, you remember People's Bank funded most of the Samurthi, and then currently, if you take the Samurthi families, I am involved in doing a lot of welfare with the local police. Most of the Samurthi families have ways of living. They do jobs. They are either employed as part-time workers, they are daily workers. Now there is a big demand for road sweepers. There's a big scarcity of them. And then, of course, there are the people who are involved in shady deals. There are about 100,000 families involved in the opium trade in this country. That's the analysis that is available in the country, but nobody takes any notice of it. So it keeps growing because the use of, as we may call the drugs, is increasing in this country. One is due to the low income level that use most of the time, but we are having rehabilitation programs in putting those addicts also back into society, but the society or the country does not have enough employment opportunities of what they want to be. So we are read in the newspapers the long queues at the passport office. 70% of the people who have obtained passports have not gone, and they have no opportunity to go because of the competition being offered by poorer countries than us. If you take, I don't want to name them, but then our minimum wage denoted is $300, but there are people who are going out of the country and working in various countries for less than the minimum wage that is stipulated by us. So the standards that are set by our country are high, and then they have less opportunity of employment. We started a program recently I do a lot of social service, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation. Now we are training people to get employed over $1,500 a month. That's a long drawn process, a lot of dropouts, but when you hang the right carrot in front of them, being trained for 7 months is a tedious process because we cannot export menial labor. We are exporting professionals. And to be a professional, they have to have the basic education level of advanced level. Even this year, we have very high results in the A-level examinations, but only about 25 to 30% enter the university. There is no opportunity given in this country for them to be given low interest loans. Most of the developed countries offer that so that they pay for their education and then they go to a skilled level where they can be gainfully employed in Sri Lanka as well as overseas. Now, if we take the foreign income level of the country, we depend a lot on the expatriate remittances. But if you look at the expatriate remittances, they average between $200 to $500 from the majority of the expatriates working outside the country. Our ambition, our stress on the Ministry of Labor and the Ministry of Foreign Employment should be to send skilled people so that they send at least a minimum of $1,000 back to the country. That's $12,000 a year, which is a grand income, and then they have the ability, if they send that value of money in 2 years, they have the opportunity of saving and buying their own house and property. So that's where we stand. And then also our investment portfolios. Now, at one time when I was a consultant in Bangladesh, instead of people putting money on horse racing. They were betting on the stock market. But all over the world, the stock market crashed, and now people are back into horse racing and short-term gambling. But with our market improving now, right now, like Roshan mentioned, the market went up yesterday, drastically. We should be in the region of about 10,000 in the statistics to be attractive in the market. And then as we are showing, we should have more companies coming into the stock market. Now that's a way of saving. That's a way of, it's a process of gambling, but you have the opportunity of losing, you have the opportunity of saving, you have the opportunity of growing. So we have to educate the people in this country. Now we talk of having a high literacy rate, but are we really educated in this country? If you take the recent gas queues, if you take the recent fuel queues, all our literacy is gone. It's beyond even the door. So, but people made money, making use of that opportunity. Black market was created. So the black market being created, the income generation improved. So what did they do? Some people saved that money and then invested in various things. Most of them, when I spoke to them, I have a habit of getting down, walking around as an ordinary man, talking to them. Their ambition was to educate their children. Even the lowest rank of the people, they want to educate their people. But I was, as I did the various numerous projects in China, there is government policy to have 30% of that country uneducated so that they have the farmers. If you educate the farmer, you are deprived of the food. That problem is happening in India also. Farmers' children are all going to IIT in India, getting educated. And when we started a company in India, we used to hire a graduate at $2,500 a month. Now they are running at about $200,000 a month, IIT graduates. That's how the level of education has improved. They are buying small cars. The Maruti, the small one, is a very high seller in India. That's their first saving. Then the next saving is they go into housing. Now the Indian private sector is building low middle class housing in a grand scale. They are building about 5 million low middle class housing, private sector projects. Government is not building. They make a certain amount of profit on that, but house per family is coming now. China did that. South Korea did it. South Korea, there are no people who do not have any house, do not own a house. Right? Almost all, 99% of their people own houses, but they are on a easy payment scheme going up to about 30 years. Same with Singapore. Singapore is going on their second round of housing, again saving for their people. The rich people stay in gated communities, but the middle class and the lower middle class of Singapore are in apartments. Almost everybody has an apartment, and now most of the families are buying their second apartment because the opportunity of saving has gone up. So that's the trend all over the world. As I started my presentation also, I said the ambition of every family is to own a house. That's the number one ambition, even in this country. Maybe all of you are having houses, 1, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 4. It all shows off your social status. Then from a Maruti, you graduate to a next level. From there, you graduate to the next level. And take, for example, the politicians of this country, from nothing, from a bicycle, now they own Land Rovers, which are 56 million, all supported by us, and made money not by legal means, but illegal means, but that is also saving for them. They have saved and invested in portfolios. So as I say, the entire world is interested in saving, only the opportunity is not available. So opportunity does not come your way. You have to seek opportunity. Opportunity does not fall on your lap. You take, for example, the savings rate is the highest in the world in a small area called Luxembourg. Maybe Roshan deals with them. Then the city of London. Now London is there, excuse me. Then there is an interior London where the richest people in the world, all the stockbrokers, all the deal makers live, the city of London. They own multitude of properties, all investing property. If you take the politicians of the United States, they all invest in real estate. That's the growth level. Of course, those countries have plenty of land. As Roshan mentioned, we have only 65,000 square kilometers in this country, but still land is available. And one of the biggest mistakes we make in these countries, cultivating more and more land. Our people, our politicians have not realized that it is useless cultivating more land. The productivity has to go up. You take Japan, the amount of land cultivated is coming down by about 3% every year. The yields are increasing by about 6% every year. So they cultivate less land and have better yield. Now you know that Russia and Ukraine are the highest wheat producing countries in the world. We don't produce any wheat, but India is also a very high wheat producing country, and they all believe in agriculture for survival, agriculture for export. So that's where my concept goes. We have to educate our people in saving. And then yesterday I had a very rich visitor from India. He invested $15 million here on certain investments where we are doing the due diligence. But even in India, gold is one of the biggest savings in that country. In this country, we first opportunity we have, especially the females, they go and buy gold. Even the men are wearing gold chains. But the second opportunity they do is go and pawn their gold, short-term finance. So those opportunities are available. We must, well, pawn shops are there in United States also, short-term. Go, give you something that is in the hand, take the money for the day, next day go and pay it back and redeem whatever you have pawned. So those are the opportunities for saving in the world, entire world. World revolves on the same theory. World revolves on the same theory that it's a case of saving what you have and then improving what you have. That's my short presentation or my fact of life. So anybody who has questions can argue on what I have said. Thank you very much, and may you have good health and long life.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for the presentation. And of course, questions can be answered during the panel discussion. That is where we are heading right now for the all-important panel discussion. And before handing over the proceedings to the moderator and all of you panelists, I have the duty with me to introduce the moderator, that is none other than Mr. Sumendra Jayaram. Mr. Sumendra Jayaram presently is a senior AGM and head of training and development in AIA Sri Lanka. Mr. Sumendra is a leader, strategist, result-driven business manager, human talent developer, a team player, motivational speaker, and a well-seasoned corporate trainer, having conducted an array of learning interventions covering areas of sales, sales management, customer service, team building, career and professional guidance, sales coaching, and other core areas in the management process. Sumendra is a fellow member of CPM Sri Lanka and obtained his MBA from Sikkim Manipal University in India. He has been awarded the postgraduate diploma in international affairs by BCIS, and he holds a postgraduate diploma in marketing awarded by SLIM, and he's also a member of Sri Lanka Institute of Marketing. Sumendra successfully completed the specialist advanced diploma in teaching, training, and assessing learning offered by City and Guilds UK, and also completed attorneys at law at the Sri Lanka Law College. Over the 26 years of his career, he served in the telecommunications service industry as well as in the insurance industry. He is currently looking after the agency training arm and the administration function of AIA Sri Lanka Academy and a supporting function to develop the partnership channel training and AIA internal staff development initiatives by HR and other departments in AIA Insurance Lanka PLC in the capacity of Head of Sales Training and Development. Sumendra is a trilingual, capable professional and competent enough to converse and conduct sessions simultaneously trilingual. In addition, Sumendra serves as a visiting lecturer in Wayamba University of Sri Lanka and Sanasa campus. He also serves as a guest lecturer in University of Sri Jawadarapura and University of Kerala. With that note, let me hand over proceedings to moderator, which is Sumendra Jairam, of course, to continue with the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ilhan, for a brilliant and a vibrant introduction. So thank you so much. Right. Once again, good evening, panelists and friends. Let me just want to remind the topic once again before I go to the discussion. Today's topic is actually a positive approach to investment and savings during an economic downturn. But Professor mentioned it's not economic downturn, in crisis. We'll take it as a crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, before I put the questions to the panel, there was a beautiful saying by Peter Drucker. He once said, the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, but is to act with the yesterday's logic. I think in this beautiful discussion, the presentation, there were very important points to highlight. Let me start with our one and only lady in the panel, Dilini. First question is to you. You actually brought a lot of facts and figures, statistics about the Sri Lankan economy and also the people's living standards and also salaries and all. Very good, and families and all. Dilini, could you tell me, now in Sri Lanka, if you just look at, people are not aware how to select the right investment or savings. Even if you just ask from a manager, what's the difference, basic difference between investment and saving, I would say most of them not aware how to differentiate both. Because I think something is lacking in our educational system. Okay, could you tell me, how can we educate Sri Lankans, especially those are professionals, on investment and savings? Because without knowing the basics, even if we give a lot of facts and figures and even the theories, nothing will work. That's why I just want to ask you, where can we educate these people on this aspect?
Thank you, Sumendra. I think that's a very pertinent question because when we speak to consumers, facts and figures just sometimes just, it's a blind spot because we do a lot of evaluation of products for banks, insurance. So we speak to consumers and sometimes they give the return rates, lots of technical jargon, which just flies over the consumer's head. If you look at financial management and the introduction to financial education, I strongly believe it needs to start at a very young age, right? I'll give an example. Most of the public sector schools have a bank, a school bank, right? It could be a particular bank who has gone and opened up this schooling, banking concept. Now, what happens is when you're young, those who can put in money starts putting in money. The ones who don't, just like in Sri Lanka, gets left behind. Now the involvement becomes putting $10 every month, and when by the time you leave school, you just get that money back with a small interest. Now, at no point in our primary education, secondary, unless you are really going into tertiary education, is this concept of financial management taught to you. So it needs to start at a young age. I think it needs to be brought in as a life skill into our curriculums. And that is something I hope the Ministry of Education will do, because at least we are in a crisis. If all of us had the ability to ask the right questions from the policymakers, we may not be here, right? So it needs to come in as a life skill at an early stage where the children can understand this and question, not when you are sitting for commerce at year 9, if you are going to a government school, international similar. I think it's a bit too late. We need to start early.
Super answers, Delni, because actually when you're talking about the positive approach for savings and investment, we need to give the basics to the people, then actually they will start to think how they can go for the right investment. I'll come back to you again. I need to ask a question from Roshan also. Roshan, you actually highlighted few important facts where people should do. The self-assessment, where are they right now? What they have with them right now? And also simultaneously, they must do a external assessment as well. Is the external environment is favorable for investment and savings? Now, Roshan, this is, I think, when we talk about this theoretically, it's so beautiful. And also, if I ask you, can a person, say a layman, maybe a professional, but is a layman, can they do this very simply?
Thank you, Sumendra. Yes, I understand that the internal assessment and external assessment comes across at first grasp as a theoretical exercise. But if you really dig down into it, it comes from a really practical place. When we take a decision, even though we don't formulate it in such theoretical sense, we always look at how it affects us, what's happening in the market. These thoughts automatically come to our mind. And if you have the advantage of having in the finance field, in the banking field, you would know these are things that you have to look at. So with that premise, I somewhat I disagree with the thing what you said about BLE being theoretical. People actually do look at these factors, even though they may not frame it as purely internal external assessment. That is how I see it. In terms of your second the question, where how to go about it, the key area we can go is research on the internet for the external environment. All the publicly available information gives us, if we have time to go into it, gives us a good indication, gives us good information of where things are. And from that, we formulate a hypothesis where things are going to be. So in terms of what GDP numbers are, what's happening with interest rates. These are, if you go to any news channel or even Sunday Times newspaper, they extensively write about these things. It's just that we have to focus because we are investing our hard-earned money. So we have to take that step into exposing ourselves, into gaining that knowledge, because we can't blindly invest in an asset class that we know nothing about, because there are plenty of horror stories. So when that's in Sri Lanka, of so many banks going under, so many leasing, so we can't afford to take that risk. I hope I've answered your question.
Actually, Roshan, very, very right. Because actually, I want you to come to this point. That's why I put it as a theoretical thing. No, Sri Lanka being a country where we have more than 93%, the literacy rate is about 93%. If you look at the adult Sri Lankans are more than 90% adult rate. But still, we have internet facility, we have technology, we have the press, everything. All these informations are freely available. But I doubt still whether these people, do this assessment? Do you have any idea how we can actually motivate or how we can actually educate these people to this basic assessment?
Right. So you bring up an important point. In terms of having access to particularly freely available information on the internet, you're talking about a cross-segment of society that will look into these things and invest in a particular asset class. Those who have, I think that's what you were getting at. Those who don't look at this, particularly won't invest in perhaps stocks or corporate debentures. So it's a strata of society who will not invest in those. This is why some of the stockbrokering firms, if you notice recently, are heavily marketing content in the Sinhalese and Tamil languages. This is to get the message out there. In the press, on TV, they're doing this quite a bit. So in terms of how we can help that cause is, I think this comes to a point that Vinny mentioned as well, the education at a younger age of investment, importance of investment, importance of having financial literacy. School is a premier place where this can happen.
Good. Thank you so much. Dr. Javira, Doctor, with your experience, I think sometimes this question is maybe a very, very simple question for you, but it's a very important question. Now, Doctor, when we just go and talk to the people around Sri Lanka, I usually ask a question from them. Say, for example, if you lose the current profession or the job, how many of you can live for next 6 months without a job or a profession? Say there are 100 people, maybe around 10 people, they just raise their hands. Now, Doctor, savings is basically for our future needs. That's not actually maximizing our money, but investment will do. In your experience, you talk about savings. Doctor, how can we educate or give some idea for our young generation to think about this aspect? Say, in Sri Lanka, the job security is not very high. Anytime the organizations can terminate the profession and send them home. In that case, for them to live, how can we educate, how can we motivate them to go for this basic saving element?
Well, this is a topic that we have also been debating, the government as well as the private sector. Now, most people, they have their wives at home. The women employment is below 30% in this country. So they must encourage their wives to go to work. When I ask, I do a lot of unnecessary things going by bus, going in three-wheelers, going in taxis, right? I talk to my neighbors. So they all say the wife is doing nothing at home. So I ask them, why doesn't your wife go to work? They have no answer. Some say the wife is looking after the children. So I quote from Europe, from America, that the children are left in childcare and the wives go to work. Now there are plenty of jobs available to do at home. There are plenty of subcontracting work to do at home. The women are just lazy. Now we started a program of feeding pregnant mothers and weaning mothers recently. We sent messages right across, and about 45 pregnant as well as weaning mothers came for this meal in the night. And say about 3 days later, I told them, bring children that are below 10. So they brought children below 10, highly misbehaved children. They're supposed to be going to school, but real ruffians. So we used to pick those children, keep them in a separate place, teach them to eat at a table. None of them know to eat at a table. The mothers feed the children. I don't know, most of you are married, but how many of you are still feeding children at 10 years old? Why should that be done? If you take Europe, you take USA, those children start eating by themselves when they start eating. That's bad discipline. So the mothers have opportunity of doing a job, doing part-time work available. In this country also, a lot of part-time work is available. The part-time work is being done by full-time people because they don't make use of that opportunity. Recently, I sponsored a Montessori daycare center in a off-town village close to a garment factory. I sponsored because this woman came to work for me, and then later she said that she would like to do this type of work. So I helped establish. The mothers come and leave the children at the home care or Montessori. They go back home and do nothing. So I went there. It's about 3 hours away from Colombo. I spoke to the mothers and told them, do something. Work with paper. Draw something. Anything that will make you money. So most of them have a lot of talent, unutilized. So I got hold of the Grama Sevaka of the area, a lady, and told her, your same kith and kin. Not that they are relatives, but females. Get them encouraged to sell their product. Now they have established a Sunday polar. So the women get some revenue. So that helps the household. I have come across now I ran many companies, many factories, and then I always tell them, get your woman to work. And then some of them have told me, sir, these days it is very unsafe to let the woman to go to work, she'll run away with somebody. That's the mental attitude of some of our men. Let them run. You can find another woman. There are plenty available. So that kind of selfishness is also there. So we have to increase this less than 30% to at least 40% for this country to survive. Otherwise, they are dependent on their men. And there are some men who are dependent on their wives. So that mentality, it is a mental programming that is required in this country. So we have 1,400 Grama Sevaka divisions in this country. Those fellows are not given a mandate of what to do. Lakshman, whatever will know, at that time we were involved in heavy welfare activities in the country. They are not given the scope of what is to be done, other than going and marking whether the children are going to school, whether they are eating, whether, all unnecessary things, but lifestyle is not being changed in the country. Very difficult, but it can be done.
Thank you, Doctor. I'll come back to again. Dini, there's a nice question. Actually, the question is the one from Renuka Koswat. She's asking, in an economic situation like this, where the inflation is skyrocketing and a person's income is reducing, in this situation, what is the best strategy to take for personal investments? Now, if you just talk about investments, there are so many types of instruments where we can invest, and as we get to savings. But in your opinion, what do you think? Now, see, you are actually into research and all. What would be the, I won't say best, what would the good instruments in a situation like this?
Whom are you directing this question, Rosanna?
Dilini.
Dilini, okay.
Yes, Doctor, yes.
In answering that question, I will look at a couple of aspects that is in the question itself. So one thing that was mentioned is the inflation component, right? Cost of living and inflation. So if you look at it, there are investments that are rupee independent. For example, if you look at gold, if you look at foreign currency, those are some of the investments we could look at. With the depreciation of the rupee, the devaluation will not be that high. So the short answer to that is, try and look at certain types of investments. Obviously, there's no one answer fits all, depending on your ability to purchase, depending on, the ability to purchase and access. I would be building access also to look at rupee independent investment opportunities. That would be my answer to that.
Okay, thank you, Dilini. Roshan, I have met people, even maybe my colleagues sometimes I have seen, when there are certain offers, maybe a loan or whatever, maybe from different financial organization, they actually take those things. If you ask them, why do you take this loan? Why do you want money at this moment or time? They don't have a purpose for it. But they come and tell us, okay, because there was a very good interest rate, so we must go for it. Since our topic is positive approach towards investment and savings, how would you advise this sort of community? Because basically, when they see an offer without a purpose, they become a person of accountable. What is the solution, or how can we advise them? Even sometimes there are people in this forum as well.
Sure, Subhendra, a good question. In terms of being attracted to the higher return, on the flip side, the assessment of the risk aspect is also important, because high return will perhaps be an indication of high risk. High risk can be the investment itself or the entity itself. What I mean is the institute that is offering the high return is offering that maybe because their capital structure is not that good. If it's a leasing company, very often that gives out a high return. Maybe they want to balance their books, being the good books with this central bank, because they have to maintain certain ratios. So they're compelled to go to the market and give a high rate. But we must not fall for such things. And as you mentioned, and I mentioned at the presentation as well, there are so many stories where people have got caught for this, and they've widely, publicly disseminated information. Central bank itself has come out and said, don't fall for these things. We will only cover you for 500,000 rupees or so. So I know the attraction is there, particularly given the current climate. But we must always remember, if somebody is offering a high return, there is a reason for that. Most likely reason is there's a high risk involved in that investment.
Okay. Dr. Javira, in this current climate, basically there's a problem in the economy. We all know that. It's a crisis, basically. It will be okay in medium term or short term, whatever. Until such time, in your experience, what would be the better instruments for savings?
Well, currently, people don't have pocket money for saving. That's the life situation. I told you about 1.3 million families of this country don't have any money to save. They are more interested in feeding themselves. But going back to your previous question about this people buying unnecessary things, I have a lot of experience in that because I am still involved in a trade that gives high service charge. So when the service charge is being paid, all the leasing companies come and book time and space to sell motorcycles, sell sewing machines, sell refrigerators, sell bicycles, sell a lot of things. But came 2019, April, the industry collapsed. So these guys lost their service charge. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months down the lane, the finance companies came and took their motorcycles. They came crying to us, couldn't help, they couldn't pay. Then the women came running to us saying that they had taken the sewing machine. So those are crisis situations that happen not only in this country, but all over the world. So your subject, or Dr. Vatavala's subject of this saving, comes into hot play during this period. Now, if you take, I quoted Luxembourg, they save of, say, average of $7,000 to $20,000 a year. Now, that's enough money to pay a deposit for a house in Luxembourg, because the interest rate is only 2%. And you can spread over 30 years. But in this country, can a person afford to buy a house because our interest rate, I don't know, housing loan, maybe Dilini will know, housing loan is about 28%, right? So in USA, when we bought, it was 5%. And then it could be rescheduled to a longer period because refinancing is available. So that kind of opportunity is not given in this country for the people development or the investment development. We all have what we call scroungers, the opportunity. Now, all the hotels are in India straight because the banks are having a call on them. But if the banks call on all the hotels, what are the banks going to do with all the hotels? Have them shut. So unemployment. So we have to think at every aspect that is there, not finding short-term solutions, but long-term solutions. Fortunately, in the hotel trade, they have been given a moratorium to pay the interest. So that kind of opportunity should be allowed. Even the USA, due to the financial crisis, they have offered a lot of concessions. Housing loans are interest is being reduced to keep the loan in service. When the country economy improves, they'll go back to the same status. But opportunity is being created for people not to go bankrupt. But in this country, nobody bothered about it. The banks are not bothered about it. They want to have a good bottom line. Now, what is the most profitable organizations in this country? Banks. There was a time that the distilleries were the profitable companies, but it has gone off the rack now. Banks, all banks are fighting to declare so many billions in profits. For what? When there is economic crisis in this country, banks should work with the country, not for themselves and their board of directors and the shareholders. They must also take a cut. The entire country is taking a cut. So we don't think in the rational aspect of it. That's why we are still a third world country. In the developed countries, the corporates take that decision. Now see, the US dollar is not controlled by the government or USA. It's controlled by the private sector. When I mention this, people don't believe. 5 families of the USA control the US dollar. US government owes them $3 trillion in debt. And because of the economic crisis in the USA, it might become $5 trillion by 2030. But they're not bothered. They're bothered about the country surviving. So that's where our education, our corporate structure, our banks have to come into this game to play the right marbles. They are not playing the right marbles. That's the fault. Sorry to say that, but that's the fact.
Okay, that's good. Thank you, Doctor. Dilini, now actually, when we talk about these savings and all, I have seen people just they go and invest. They use the word invest. I invest money in a vehicle. I invest money in a car. Car is a liability or an investment. How do you say, Dilini?
As I said during the presentation, the very definition of an asset, right, is if it starts working for you, right? I think if you look at us, we say, okay, my house is an asset and it's on a loan. You know, if you are really looking at taking a facility against that or facility to fund it, you're not really looking at an asset. You're really not looking at an investment. Right? You're looking at being on a losing wicket of paying off and paying off and paying off. And sometimes by the time you pay off, you spend quite a lot. But in a market like Sri Lanka as of today, if you do invest in things like land, yes, long term, it will appreciate in value, right? That's what Roshan was talking about, diversification of the portfolio. But this concept of I have invested in a house, I have invested in a car, it's very loose. You know, I think that's where the financial education needs to come in. What is an investment? What is an asset? What's a liability? And what is the net loss in really making that so-called investment? That financial literacy is really lacking. So I think people use words very loosely because they do believe it's an investment. I mean, when we speak to, as I said, we speak to lots of people, for a month, 3,000, 4,000 people in our samples. And when we do banking sector and financial sector work, it's amazing, the kind of answers that they give as to why they are even with an institution. I have selected this because I've been working with it for so many years. So my childhood bank book was with them. 30 years, 40 years down the line, you're still with them. It doesn't talk about key category drivers. It doesn't talk about recurring trust, aspects of that nature. So it's really important to bring that education concept. To answer your question short, those are not investments. If you are taking it, if you're taking a loan to fund those, if you're taking leases to fund those aren't investments. They're just liability.
Okay, thanks. And also just an extension to my previous question. Still, people are trying to educate the corporate sector, even though people still believe since usually the vehicles should depreciate, but in this country, unfortunately, the vehicles are appreciating. So still people keep on investing their hard-earned money on vehicles and such things, all liabilities. How can we actually convert these people? How can we actually give them the right direction?
See, if you look at it, the concept of education has to be there, and it cannot start, with a large segment of the population. I think we need to look at which segment are we talking about. If you look at principles of marketing, it talks about segmenting, targeting, and positioning. If I apply the same principles into educating the market, we need to segment it. You take the bank, I think the vulnerability is higher amongst the non-bankable population in this country, which Dr. Jayavir also spoke about in terms of, the ones who are really struggling. Now, them getting into debt trap is really high, and the kind of debt that they get into with loan sharks, we had lots of instances. So maybe education needs to start off with those segments. It doesn't have to be, where you trade off saying, okay, I'm going to educate this segment first, but you can really even start a parallel program where you look at education, and that is where the service providers have a real big responsibility. I do agree with Dr. Jayavir, profit maximization, if that is your motivation and only motivation, and if you are not looking at sustainability in terms of what you give back and running a sustainable business model, where you look at community investment, where you look at, really working for the communities who are with you. If you don't have an outlook of that nature, and if you're only interested in profit maximization, yes, there is a problem. So education needs to be there, and I think the service providers need to be regulated. There's a big role that they have to play in bringing this message forward. I mean, you don't get up one day and decide, okay, I'm educated enough to make this investment, quote unquote investment. So it is a long shot, but it needs to start. And I think this is the right time to start it.
Good, nice, good. Thank you. Roshan, I think, thank you. You're providing all the answers for the questions on the chat box. Thank you so much. Roshan, I come from insurance industry, so I talk about risk all the time. Now, in investment, as well as in savings, there is a risk component is there. The only thing what we can do is we can transfer the risk to a person who can accept the risk. In your opinion, in investments, how can we reduce the risk?
In terms of reducing the risk of an investment, I believe there are two main areas. The first area is having a diversified portfolio. A diversified portfolio can be ranging from what you may classify as a risk-free investment, which can be FDs, savings, and so on. And at the other end of the spectrum, you can be your stocks, real estate, and also, as Lilian pointed out, the Bitcoin, that kind of the risky investment. So diversified portfolio will reduce your risk profile. Being heavily weighted on either side, if you're heavily weighted on fixed deposit savings, if something happens to the banking sector, which is out of our control, then your portfolio gets wiped out. Similar risk on the other side. So that is a key thing to reduce the risk profile. The other aspect, Sumendra, is constant monitoring and rebalancing of your portfolio based on your situation and also what's happening in the market. As I give a few examples during my presentation, things can happen to each and every one of us in our personal lives, which can increase our risk appetite, which can reduce our risk appetite. So managing that element is also key. Even though it seems as if it's straight out of a textbook, we do it day in and day out. For example, now, as you have seen in, I believe in April, when Nandalal Veerasinghe, the central bank governor, doubled the interest rate from 7% to 14% on his appointment, you saw many people converting their current FDs and putting it into a higher rate. So they're rebalancing their portfolio on a high interest rate. They're willing to take the risk of a penalty interest and to go for it. So So that is a clear example of people understanding what's happening in the market and choosing an investment option that gives them a high return. So those two aspects, I would say, are key to managing a risk profile.
Okay, basically, to just summarize and put it in a very simple format, we have to put the eggs in different baskets rather than putting in the same basket in order to reduce the risk. And also, Roshan, now, if you just look at the Sri Lankan context, individuals are not, because actually the GSEC investment is, I think, low risk, but even though most of the Sri Lankans are not aware of it, only a very, very limited people, they know about it, they go and just invest in the GSEC. But if you just look at the traditional way of investment, people, as very correctly mentioned by Dilini and Dr. Jayaveer, they still use that they hold the passbook or whatever, and that is their investment, that is their saving, everything is there. So basically, I think the awareness should come from the beginning. Once again, if I just come back to Dilini, what are some of the learnings we can take as a country based on the presentations which you did?
Hard question to answer, because I think we are on a continuous learning cycle, and I don't know when, as a country, we are now learning is going to really be implemented. I think there are a lot of lessons learned. If you look at it, I think it's very clear. I'm just going to take what I took at a personal level and escalate it up to the country. It talks about really having, I think the first lesson is for us to have sustainable debt as a country. That's what even as Roshan said, tomorrow we will know what the stance of IMF is during the press conference. So I think really looking at sustainability, how are we going to look at restructuring some of the SOEs, to look at greater profitability, looking at balancing portfolios, and I would add something on which is not in my presentation, great international relations. We managed to perhaps tick off some of the countries. So as a country, there's a lot that we need to do, and it really revolves around 3 principles. The first principle is really looking at sustainability, looking at income generation. Dr. Jayaveer spoke about the foreign remittances that we all talk about. If it's like so low per person, what are we talking about? We need to have a proper strategy to improve that. It's almost equivalent to getting that second job or making your investments work for you. And the third aspect is really, in this process, having dialogue with all stakeholders that involves the international community, and as well as finally educating the general public in Sri Lanka about financial management. I would also like to ask, if I may, Roshan and Dr. Jayaveer to add on to that. I mean, I'm just taking that and just escalating it.
Okay, I just
not
put the same.
Not Sunendra, but just want to add that in. Thanks.
I just actually want to add something and just put the same question to Dr. Jayaveer on a different format. Dr. Jayaveer, now actually we are talking, there's a crisis in the country, economic crisis. But I think when there's a crisis, basically our family economy should be strengthened. So basically the personal financial management is one way where we can actually strengthen our family income. Then only we can go for investment and saving. What is your opinion and what is your suggestion for our audience, how they can strengthen their family economy?
Okay, now we have, as Dilini pointed out, we have different strata in this country. And I also mentioned that we have 1.3 million people in the poverty line who are struggling to get 3 meals a day. Now, most of the media in this country highlight the poor of the poor. But then in this country, nobody has died of starvation up to now. Only one person has died of starvation, but that was also deliberately starved to death. So there is always some food in this country edible. Right now, I know, as I told you, I deal with people in Colombo area, I deal with people in outside Colombo. There are people who have gone to the extent of drying cosata. All this time cosata was thrown. Jackseed was thrown. So they are gone to the extent of crushing jackseed and eating or making powder now. Jackseed in Bangladesh is made into roti. We throw it. Now Bangladesh, the jack is the national fruit. Most of the people survive on jack. But here, if people eat jack, we are poor. We have to eat rice. In Bangladesh also, the rice economy has crashed right now. They're importing rice. Up to about 2 years ago, Bangladesh was self-sufficient. When I was working in Bangladesh, they said Bharat is very important for our people. So the government, Hasina's government at that time, gave handouts for the farmers to grow. Of course, when the floods come, the paddy fields get destroyed, but they looked after the economy of Bharat. And then we went to the extent of borrowing $250 million from the Bangladesh economy. They went to IMF and got $3 billion, showing that, hey, we have lent money to Sri Lanka, please lend us some money to get over the economic crisis. Pakistan. Today I was reading about $5 billion being collected by Imran Khan for the bailout of the flood victims. Government couldn't do it. Government is going to IMF to borrow $3 billion for their survival. This guy thrown out, Prime Minister collected $5 billion to help the flood victims. Now that's a private individual now. He's not even a member of parliament, thrown out of parliament. How many of our people will go out of their portfolio to do that? Our private sector is now going and giving bags with their name on it. People are happily carrying and giving statements to TV. They hope they go to heaven. No. I did a program recently. We gave vouchers for them, 3,500 rupee vouchers, 1,000 and 500 for them to go and buy from a certain chain what they like. But I got to know that some of them have gone and sold their vouchers at a lower rate because they want the money. But we went through the Grama Sevaka, we went through the PHI, we went through various people in selecting those families. But that's gone to that level. So we have to be very, very careful in working in this country to get overexposed. And then, as I said, literacy is there, education is not there in this country. So Dilini, people like you, professionals, young people like you, have to send this message across in the local media, how they could survive during a crisis. Now, our media is totally negative. Right now, our exports have grown by 1.6% during this month. Who has highlighted that? Nobody has highlighted that. But they will highlight, saying that there is scarcity of drugs, there is scarcity of this, there is scarcity of milk. We can survive without milk. How many people in this world drink milk? Take some of the African countries. Never heard of milk, other than mother's milk. We make it a point to send foreign exchange out of this country. Now, if you drink a cup of tea, a normal man drinks a cup of tea, that's foreign exchange. They don't realize that, but still asking for milk. You can be without milk. Eat rice, eat kanji. I did a program with the FAO director in Bangladesh. He told me 10 years ago, your children in Sri Lanka are going to malnutrition. And he happened to be a Bangladeshi of the FAO. Right, yeah, that's right. So, Food and Agriculture Organization. Right? He was encouraging Bangladesh mothers to give kanji to their children with chicken liver. I went to a chicken farm along with him. The chicken are in better status than the chicken farm manager. That fellow is in a filthy hut, but the chicken are in luxurious quarters because they were encouraging the chicken farming in Bangladesh at that time because they found that nutrition is required to grow their children, and the Bangladesh economy is developing. Bangladesh IT industries developing, growing very much more than our country because of the mental capacity of those children have been strengthened by feeding. So we don't give kanji to our children. We go and give there is some formula in this country available to be given to children. Why is that? We give milk powder, that's 3%, which has mungnata, kadala, not kadala, but all local product in that. Give 3%, which is being given by the government. We are not feeding our children that. So we talk of malnutrition of the children. We are 6th in the world for malnutrition, but we are not feeding the children. That's the whole reason.
Very true. As you very correctly said, Doctor, I think we need to start from the grassroots level, basically from the household must start to do for certain financial management. Then I think the positive the approach will start from the home itself. Last questions. The time is actually almost, we have reached the end time. I want to pose these questions to Roshan and Dilini. Could you all tell us one strategy for our audience where they can go for a positive investment or a saving?
Very tricky questions, Mendra. Because I mean, for a positive investment, okay. So when you say a positive investment, I assume you are referring to generating a positive return on the investment.
Of course, definitely. Right? Not the instrument, the return, of course. Yeah. Yes.
So that will be a function of your cost of your funds. What source of funds? As Dilini mentioned, are you going to use debt? Then your cost of funds is going to be high, which means you need a higher return. If you're going to use your own money to make that investment, then you have to look at the opportunity cost of those funds. So in that sense, you have to consider all aspects. But to simply answer your question, at the moment, the government securities, particularly bonds, which are going around 29%, 30% based on today's auction, seems like a viable option from a risk-free perspective.
Okay.
That is my short answer.
Fine. That's the answer I actually want from you, be an expert in this industry. Dilini, what is your strategy for us?
Adding on to what Roshan said, I think he already spoke about bonds. Right now, there's a big hype around FDs in the market. As I said earlier during the presentation, everybody's very excited. Anyone who has money is very excited about the FDs. Just recently, there was a tweet from a famous person saying, you know what, I went to a particular bank and the service was really low and I went to open an FD. The thread recommended so many banks with the interest rate, which also talks about that segment who's into financial management and investment, really, knowing what's happening out there. So I would think another option is an FD, but lower than bonds, like what Roshan said. Yeah, so that way, but again, I would actually say balance your portfolio. That's a really important aspect. Just don't look at the return aspect only. Just one thing I would also like to add is the fact that there were a couple of requests to Vendra for the PowerPoint to be shared. I will share it with the institute. You can email it out to all the participants. And where possible, I have replied everyone privately.
Of course, I have seen replies from you as well as from Roshan. There are most of the questions are focused for both of you. So thank you so much. And I think since it's almost 8:37, Dr. Ilhan, I think we had to end the session. So it was a very fruitful session. And I learned a lot of things from your discussion. And I hope our audience also would have learned. So thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Ilhan. Thank you, Dilini. Thank you, Roshan, and thank you, Dr. Tissa Javira, for bringing our brilliant points, which sometimes we have not thought about. Obviously, these points can make a person to think very positive approaches for investment as well as savings. With that note, I once again hand over the forum to our good friend, Dr. Dilhan.
Thank you very much. Great. Indeed, a wonderful panel discussion. Of course, very apt topic for the 29th presentation of the Evening for Managers series organized by CPM. So let me take the opportunity once again in conclusion to extend the heartfelt gratitude on behalf of CPM to the moderator, Mr. Sumendra Jairam, for conducting a wonderful session, and not to forget our three presenters, Dr. Tissa Javira, as well as Ms. Dilini Jayasuriya and Mr. Roshan Ranasinghe. On that note, we come to the winding up of EFM, a positive approach to investment and savings during an economic downturn. I'm sure all of you who have joined us gain enormous amount of knowledge with the three presenters and also being part of the panel discussion. Until we meet on the next, or rather 30th presentation of EFM, all the very best and have a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.